All right, you watched the first part, you're ready for the second part. We're continuing our build on the Mars weather app. If you didn't see the first part, I strongly recommend you check that one out first. And I'm assuming you did. In this one, we're going to be writing our CSS. We're going to be doing mostly focused on that black box thing that has most of the information in it. So we're going to be going through that and making it look good. We're going to be using CSS Grid for the layout of it. A lot of fun with that. We see a few different challenges, how you can troubleshoot Grid and a few other things along the way. It will be a lot of fun. Let's jump right into it. All right, so here we are ready to get started in our CSS, and you might have noticed I already have a bunch of stuff in here. It's pretty much all the boring stuff that you don't want to watch me write. So I've just changed my box sizing on here. I have set up all my variables here, or all my custom properties. If you're not comfortable with custom properties, or maybe you've never seen custom properties, you'll probably get a good idea of how they work while I'm working on this. They're not scary, they're just really awesome. But if you want, I do have a 6-part playlist that dives into how they work, but if you just watch the first video on that, it would be more than enough to understand what I'm doing here. But basically, I can just write, like here in my body, I didn't use it, so let's set it up. I want my color to be var color light. And by doing that, what it's doing is it's going to go, okay, my color is var color light. Let's go look at what light is. It's FFF. So then it's setting that as my default color, which is awesome because that's the one I'm using a lot here. And then if ever I need to, I could use that over and over. And then if ever I change it in this one place, it would change everywhere. So that's what that is. So we come and take a look. We can see that everything has turned over to white by me setting that up there. Otherwise, I haven't done too much. I've set up this SR only. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And we have my body right here. So on the body, I just remove my margin, set my font family. I put a line height of 1.6. I might change that as we're working on it. It's just a default that I love to set. I've set a background image. I've set a height and an overflow of hidden. Normally, I would never do this. I'd set like a minimum height maybe, but setting an actual height on the body scares me, especially with overflow hidden, because that means we can't scroll to get other content. I'm really doing this as like a full desktop experience. And hoping that it works all right. Because this, which is going to slide up and down, when it's down, we want it to be hidden. I don't want to have to load it in. I want it to be there from the beginning, so it just slides up, all the content is there, and it's all working. So I'm doing it like this, but again, unless it's definitely 100% just like a single page app that you're doing, a min height would be a lot safer here, and on the body, this is a little bit dangerous, but it's going to work for us in this case. Now, as far as this class here, I got this from Scott O'Hara, and I'm going to include the link for this down below in the description if you want to read more about it. It's a really awesome post on inclusively hiding content, and also what if you need to hide something from a screen reader. So I encourage you to check this out if you want to read more about it. Basically, it's going to make sure that everything hides it, and if you want to know more about accessibility, I'd strongly recommend that you do follow Scott O'Hara. He has some really awesome content on it. So for my screen reader only stuff, that's going to hide it from the screen reader. It's going to hide it from people, but not the screen reader, which can be very useful. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started with actually styling up some stuff. So let's come and look. So we're just going to sort of work our way through this whole thing. So right now it's looking a little bit like this. So I think the first thing I'm going to do, usually I go into my typography first, but let's come in and set up our main that we created. So it was my Mars current weather. And in Mars current weather, we had the background that was black, but we can do that as a RGBA of 0, 0, 0. Let's just try like 0.7 and see what that looks like. I think that is right about right. I think the contrast is high enough on that. We want some padding on that because we don't want our text all stuck to the side. So padding on here we can do is something like a 2M. We want it to be away from the sides. Now you could do we could set a width on here of actually, I'm going to set a max width. So max width of say 1,000 pixels or something like that. And so you could do like a margin 0 auto, and then it's just stuck in the middle. But I want to not only do it that way, I want to pull it down a little bit as well. So I'm going to put a margin of 4M from the top. We don't really need a margin on the right side. We don't really need a margin on the bottom. And then we can add in another 4M or something like that. So we get like an equal spacing here and here. And if we go onto bigger screens, it's going to stay. Whoa, didn't realize that. Let's fix that. Background image and background size cover. How did I forget that? There we go. So that'll look a little better. So to stay like right hand side, maybe 4M's a little small, but we'll stick with it for now. And it is a max width. Doesn't want to shrink right now. We'll see if we can get that shrinking a little bit. And we're going to have some fun with grid on this one. But before we get into the grid, let's set up our typography a little bit. So usually I always keep my typography stuff here at the top. And I could be using Sass and splitting all this up, but it's a one-page thing here. I'm not going to go into doing all that. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is on all my headings, I'm going to give them just a line height of 1 to start with. I might need to overwrite that later on, but because they tend to be bigger, they're bold, I have a lot of all caps going on. This line height, which is on my body, which I think is even maybe too small, is way too big generally on titles and stuff. So I'm going to do that. And again, we might have to make some modifications to it, but nice, quick, easy win. Then we have my main title. And this is where I name I'm going to come up just to look at my variables here for a second, or my custom properties. You'll see font size H1, font size H2, font size body. I have my font size extra large. Like, I'm very specific in how I name these things, even my light, my normal, my semi-bold, and all that. It makes it really easy when we're setting up things like this, and you're just doing font size var. You don't have to think about it. You know it's my H1, so I just put that. Font weight, weight in this case, var font weight light, and just to come back to here. Actually, let's break that down off, just so we can be looking at both of them at the same time. We might have to stop having both at the same time eventually, but we can keep them both there for the moment. Looking at what as I code it and seeing if it's working while we're doing it. So if I hit save on that, we should see it is looking a bit better. We can do a text transform of uppercase on there. The color will be my var color accent. We want that reddish color. And one thing I really like with VS Code, and I don't know about the other ones, but as soon as, I like doing my custom properties, like starting with color, because then I don't even have to remember my color. I just do color, and then I see my whole list of colors just pop up like that. So nice. Such a cool feature. And so that's looking pretty good. Now, I didn't do this here, but looking at it now, it's bugging me a little bit. So I'm also going to do a little bit of letter spacing on this of like 1 pixel. Just to space that out a little bit. Maybe I could even go up to like 2 pixels. And just to spread it out a little bit, it looks a little bit tight to me there. Makes it a little bit, I don't know, I like it more. So I'm going to do that. And let's go to my next. So my next one is my section title, which is this one and this one. It's going to affect this at the beginning. So we have my section title. And that section title will be the font size var font size H2. Font weight var font size font weight, and in this case I'm guessing it's bold. Let's just see. There we go. That's looking pretty good already. And then we need my color. No, we don't need color. It's the right color already. I'm just gonna put a margin of 0 though, because if you look here, because of the font size on these, the margin bottom on them, it's creating this huge space that we are not going to want. Because if you look here, this is probably too tight, but we want to keep things pretty tight together. So just a margin of 0 on those is going to help us out. Now, if you watched when I did the first part on here, I'm going to have a section title date, which is my Sol 377. So on there, this is where I have my font size var font size extra large. I called it extra large because it's the only thing that has this big font size on it. So there we go. I'm not using that anywhere else, but by having it as a variable, it could be reused somewhere else if I needed a really big font somewhere. Another thing I'm going to do here just really fast. Actually, I'll do this up here with my H1, my H2, just because I like keeping tags or element selectors together and then having my class selectors down there. What I'm going to do here is have my color var color accent. And then this is a little bit of Sass. My and hover will be color var color the dark one. Basically, with Sass, when you nest it and you put an ampersand, it's just doing that and not nesting it. So we have that. So if I come take a look down here, you can see there it is working just like that. Cool. I think what I'm going to do, usually I do all my typography first, but I want to break this up into the grid that I have set up here. So let's come down. So right here, I said we're going to do a display of grid. Cool. So when I do that, nothing really changes at first. So let's set up our grid. Now, if you don't know too much about grid, I'm not doing a big deep dive in this one, but I think it'll be pretty straightforward, I hope. Basically, I just need to have 3 columns, right? So grid template columns, we'll do a repeat 3, 1FR. So all that's doing is creating 3 columns. You can see everything has broken across those 3 columns, just like that. Fantastic. Now we need to position things properly on that. And what I'm going to do, normally we could come back up here. We can do it here, main title. I want my main title to go all the way across that grid. So I want it to start here and go all the way to the end. If you're not familiar with grid, one thing I would say is 100% make sure you use Firefox. Let's dock this on the bottom for this one. Use Firefox, because within Firefox you have the grid inspector. So if I turn that on, we can see we have my grid line numbers, and it's putting this grid. Now purple I can't see too well. I think a green, there we go. We can now see all of that. It makes it so easy to see why everything is going where it is. So please, if you're just experimenting with grid, it has a Flexbox inspector too, which is amazing, but this grid inspector, you need to be using it. Please. It's such a cool tool. You can turn off your line numbers if you don't like them, or the area names, which we're not going to use, and you can extend stuff. You can do lots of really cool things with it. So I want this title to go all the way across the top. So here on my main title, I can do grid columns, or grid column, not grid columns. So I want it to start at 1, and I want it to go all the way to the end, which is 4, but it's also -1. So anytime you need to go one side all the way to the other, it's always safest just to do something like that, because you know it's all, maybe you change the content that's on here after, and it ends up switching, you end up with 5 or 6, but you still want that stretching all the way across. Always the safest way to do it. So that is awesome. The next thing we want to do is position my 3. So let's come down here. So my 3 different things were my temp, my wind, and my, we can put the first one up here, the date. And this one's already where it needs to be, but I do like explicitly telling things where they should go. So grid column of 1/2. So I'm saying start at line number 1 and stop at line number 2. Then my temperature, we're going to say start at line number 2 and go until line number 3. And my wind, we can say grid column start at line number 3 and go to line number 4. Now in this case, they are actually falling into those spaces. So if you didn't do that, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's still going to work. But I just know that if I screwed something else up along the way, at least they're still going to be where they should be. So I'm going to leave those like that. And we still need to do some more stuff in there anyway. I also have my .info. Was it info? I think I called it info, which would have a grid column of, we want it to start at 1, but we want it to end at 3 in this case. So 1/3. And we had the last thing, which is our toggle, which I actually forget what I called. I called it my unit toggle. So the last one be unit toggle, and grid column will be my 3/4. So if I hit save on that, there we go. You can see everything is going exactly where we want it to be when we compare it to the design that we have here. So that's really, really cool. Now, another thing is I do want to build a bit more space, because you can see these are getting kind of close together. So here, after my grid, I'm also going to come in and add in a grid gap. You'll see here that VS Code's actually telling me not to use it. The property is obsolete, avoid using it. Shorthand that specifies is replaced with the gap property. Don't listen to this yet. Gap is where things should be, but it is not widely supported by browsers yet. I think Firefox is the only one that's actually supporting it. So grid gap it is, and it will, even if once this does become obsolete, the browsers will still support it. So it's not like it's going to break our site one day. So here I'm just going to do like a 2M and see what that looks like. So I think that's enough space. If we need to build in more, we always could build in a little bit more space that way. It also gives us a nice healthy space in between vertically, but if we needed to, I'm trying to think, do I want to? No, I think I'm going to keep that space because I do want to keep a gap going that way. Cool. So everything's positioned exactly where we need it to be. We can start seeing, if our typography is working the way it should be. I do want to make a few more changes in here. So there's my section title. Another sort of generic one I did was my reading. So in my reading, I'm going to give that a font. The font size here was actually the same as my font size H1. So like this font size and this one, if you look here, they're not the same. We're going to make them the same. They're also going to have a margin of 0 because, you know, they sort of need to be a little closer together there. And the color on them, we want to be var color gray. Whoops, not light, gray. And there we go. That is looking pretty good. Now, if you don't remember, I said I didn't want to keep the white here. I wanted to keep those consistent, so all three of them have changed. That's why I did it as like a generic reading class and not a specific one for each one of those. Okay, the next thing we want to do is come down a little bit inside my date now. I'm going to use a bit of sass here and just do day. So the day here, font size will be my var font size H2. I specifically made sure if you look at this, it's actually the same font size as those. So that should work nicely. Once again, a margin of 0 should help suck that up. Color, var, color, gray. You can start seeing how useful these, I love it. You don't have to try and guess numbers, remember numbers, hex codes, RGB values, all of that you can super easily save as variables. My font weight here, font weight should be var font weight light. Oops, font weight light. That looks a little bit better. It was probably even a little lighter here, but I'm going to keep the consistency we have right there. I'm going to turn off my grid for a second because it is distracting me. There, I think that is looking pretty good actually. So now we want the dividers coming this way and that way. And there's a few different ways we could do this, but I'm going to only do it. I'm going to grab my temp here and we're going to do the whole thing on here. A lot of the time with things like that, I would actually use pseudo elements, but man, it's a little overkill for something like this when we can just set up a border. So I can say border left is, and actually, you know what we could do? Since we've been talking about custom properties, I could set up my border like this, where I do border and do a solid, I don't know how big we want it. Let's try like 0.5 em. It's probably way too big. And then my var color accent dark. So because it's the dark color I saved there, I use that for my link cover. So we want that same dark color, which is really hard to read here. We'll see how it looks there. And I might change that for my hover. But let's just keep going. So, so by doing that, then I could do something like this where border left is var border. And border right is my var border. And that should, there we go, we can see they've loaded in. That's pretty cool, right? So basically, this is, normally these are considered like global custom properties. These are available in anything because they're placed on my root. Whereas here, this would be a local custom property. It would only be available to temp and temp's children. I wouldn't be able to use that inside my date, for example. Now, if I had to reuse this border in other places, it was showing up just, you know, I had a single left border here, and then I had a single left border and some of the things down there. That would be a good time to have it as a global custom property. But in this case, because this is the only place I'm ever going to use this, to me, it makes a lot of sense to have it as a local. And the nice thing here is, like, if I decided, no, they should actually be thicker, I can make that a 1, and they're both going to switch at the same time. Or if I need that to be smaller and I make it a 0.25, they're both going to get smaller at the same time. It makes it really easy to update. Now the one obvious problem is it's stuck to the side here. So we could just come in and add a bit of padding for that. Padding left of like 2em or something. There we go. And actually the left and the right. So 0 on the top and the bottom, 2 on the left and the right to make sure it is nice and consistent. Super duper. And actually 2em I was saying it could be any number. In this case, because it's the same as my grid gap, I know let's turn my grid back on. I know this space is 2em, and now I know this space is 2em, so it's going to be perfectly consistent the whole way. There's a little bit of extra room there, but you get the idea that it's always going to be fitting across. So there we go. That is coming together nicely, really nicely. Actually, I'm rolling along great here. So let's go and create this little guy. So we're jumping into Win now. So for this, it's going to be interesting because we have a few different things we're going to want to do here. I think what we're going to do is first create this circle. So So in here, I have my and direction. So once again, I think a size property would be really good here. Let's try 10 rem. We'll see what it looks like. So we'll give it a width of var size and a height of var size. And one reason I like doing this is if I need to adjust it, I don't have to change it in two places at once. I just change it here and it updates both. So if you need a perfect circle or a perfect square, you know it's going to work. So we can do a background on here, background color of, I can't use one of my variables, so we'll just do an RGBA of 0, 0. Actually, no, in this case we need white, 255, 255, 255.5. There we go. It looks okay, but it's way too big, so maybe half that size, and we can always play with it if we need to. So, and you can see there, I only updated it in one place, so that is super duper handy. All right, I guess a border radius on this would be handy too. Border radius of 58%. There we go. We have a nice perfect circle, and now we want the arrow. So I'll come to here, and let's just and wind. And again, remember, I am nesting this in Sass, but if I wasn't nesting this in Sass, it would just be me doing wind, wind. It wasn't wind, it was arrow, arrow. So that would be arrow coming down here. So me writing it like this and nesting it is the same thing in regular CSS of writing it out like that. So my arrow, how are we going to do my arrow here? I'm going to be using custom properties for this as well, but in this case, these custom properties, update custom props with in.js to update the direction. And actually, this is a Sass comment. CSS comments are, as you would probably know, like this. So it's a multi-line comment. In Sass, if you do a Sass style comment, or like the JS style with the 2 lines, it's not going to export to your CSS, whereas something like this would. So just in case Kyle ends up looking not at my Sass file, but at my final CSS file, I'll leave a comment like that. So hopefully he ends up seeing it in there. So here we can say that, and maybe even, this could be worth coming to here, because he's going to be mostly in here. He's probably not looking at my styles. So let's find my wind arrow. I could put my comment here, update direction custom prop to change arrow direction. So that way, if we make any changes, you know, if when he's going through here, he knows exactly what he needs to do in his in his JavaScript. He doesn't even have to come and look here. But we'll leave that comment there as well. So we can have direction. We'll start it at 0 degrees, and we can always update that. And once again, I'll put a size in here, and we'll start with 1 rem and see what happens as we go through our sizes. So here, height will be var size. I think we're gonna do something fun, but we're gonna start off like this, width var size. We'll give it a background var color accent dark. So we should see a little box show up in there. Now we don't want it to be a box like that, obviously. We want it to be stretched out. So to be able to stretch it out like that, so we have my height, my width. In this case, I think it's my height I'm gonna take, and we're gonna do a calc on this one. So we'll wrap this whole thing in a calc, and that lets me do math. So I'm gonna take my size and multiply it by 3. So that should make it 3 times taller than it is wide, and then no matter what number I put here, I update the one place, it's updating it everywhere. For rem, you put it in pixels, whatever it is, it's always going to keep that ratio. So that is also another reason that custom properties are cool. You can use them in calcs, and it's super, super dynamic. And now to get it into an arrow shape, I'm going to use a clip path. Now you can also do the same thing that I'm going to do here with borders and make like a triangle border. I'm going to do it this way. It's up to you how you want to do it. The browser support for clip path is not 100%, but I'm not worrying too much about browser support at this stage. You know, I'm using Grid, and I'm not building any background, you know, follow-ups or anything like that. We're cutting edge on this. You know, we're going to Mars, we're talking about Mars, that's cutting edge. We're sticking with the cutting edge. So here I can just do polygon. Triangles, I know. Any other shape I wouldn't know. 0%, 100%, and then 100%, 100%. And that should turn that into a triangle. Whew, there we go. Awesome. Let's just turn word wrap off there so you can see it. So it's basically it means we're starting, you always start at the top corner. So we're going 50% across, and that's where the first point is. And the 0 is the up and down. So we're going 50% this way and we're stuck to the top. Then we're going 0%. So 0% is the bottom corner here, and 100% it's all the way at the bottom. And then we have the 100%, 100% that's over here. So it's making it into a triangle like that. I'll put a website in the description below on like a cool clip path generator. It's all visual, super easy to use, and just makes life so much easier if you do want to use clip paths. And the next thing I'm going to do is put a, I'm trying to think. We want it to be in the middle, and it's not in the middle right now. We could do this with Flex, but why not just stick with our grid since we're using it everywhere already? So if I do a display grid on here, with Flex, you do like a justified content center, align items center. You can do the same thing with Flex, but you can do it on, with grid, I mean, but place items center works fantastically well. Boom, it's right in the middle. It's just shorthand. Place items is shorthand for, does it tell us there? The align items and justify items property. So it's centering it both ways. Now the only problem is it is centered, but it doesn't look centered. Visually, the weight of it, it looks like it's a lot closer to the bottom. So we can fix that because we're going to need a transform on this anyway. So if I come here and I put a transform, the first thing I'm going to do is, let's just get it positioned actually a little bit better. So we're going to do a translate y, whoops, y of -50%, which should pull it up. Which is pretty good. This one was a little bit smaller, I think, than that one. So, you know, like say here, I just made this like a 0.75. There we go. It's a little bit more similar to that. And now I think I'm actually going to bring that back up to 1 just because I liked it. That's fine like that. It might even be sticking off the top a little, which is completely fine with me. But what I want it to do is, actually, maybe it's, let's try and make our circle a little bit bigger too. There we go. That looks a little bit more similar, I think, to what we had. And now we want to be able to rotate around. So that's why we needed a transform anyway. So this visually, you know, this one actually, I probably had like a 25% on it. But I'm just thinking from a CSS point of view, it's going to be a lot easier to do it like this. Because what this is pretty much done. Actually, I'm trying to think. I had that at 6 now, and my size here is 3. So this, okay. Stop here for a second. Lesson time. Let's understand what I was really doing here. So this is by far the most complicated part. Anyway, okay. So this could be a good time to have a custom property that actually I was using here and here for the size. But just to explain, I have my 6 rem from top to bottom right here. So 6 from here to here. Then my height of my arrow is 3. So by default, when it's like this, we have 3 right in the middle. So that means we have 2, 6. So we have like 1.5 there, 1.5 here, and this is dead center. By doing it, moving it up 50% of its own size with this translate, it's putting 3 here, and then we have empty 3 on the bottom. Now, why is that important? Why does that matter at all? What it means is, because when I do this, I'm also going to want to rotate it. So if I do a rotate of say 45 degrees, see how we're not really pointing where we want it to go. But what we can do is a transform origin. And if I have a transform origin on there of, I'll do bottom center. Now, and actually let's put a transition just so we can see how this is working better. Transition of transform, 500 milliseconds, whatever, ease. Doesn't matter too much there. So now if we had something here, I'm going to inspect my element just because I think it's going to be the better way to do it. To show you what's happening. When direction, screen reader only, arrow, here we go. Okay, so here my rotate of 45 degrees. So if I update this to like 180 degrees, see how it's where it's rotating from? 0. It's always rotating from this bottom center right here, which is because this is 3 rem, and because my whole circle is 6 rem, that bottom center here is dead middle on my circle. So by doing it like this, it's making sure that whatever I'm putting in here, it's always rotating right around that dead center, and it's always going to show us the direction properly. There we go. That's cool. I don't really need to keep this on because it's not going to be updating live, I don't think. But here, we don't want to actually have 45 degrees. We want it to use my var direction. And that way, when Kyle comes in with the JavaScript, he can easily plug in from the API that, put the direction, update the custom property here, and that's, you're going to see it's going to update there just like that. So he's going to be updating the custom property rather than updating something else. That, it's a nice clean way to do it with custom properties. And another cool reason, because custom properties are super easy to manipulate with JavaScript. So more wins for custom properties. All right, now the thing that's a bit more interesting here though is we do want it to be 2 columns. And we might as well keep the grid love going because of how I've set up my HTML. If I would have done this in one div and then I'd kept this in its second div, I could have used flex. But because I didn't wrap these in an extra div, grid works great for this because it's, I get 2 rows and 2 columns of content. It's going to work fantastically, and it's one of the things I love about grid. With grid, I don't need to wrap things in divs just for positioning. I just write the flattest markup I can, and then I can get it to work the way I need it to when I'm doing this. So here in Wind, I can do my display grid. We want to have let me just think for a second, grid template columns. You got to spell template properly with a T. And then we just want 2 columns, so repeat 2, 1 FR. Like that. Now, that sort of breaks things to start with, right? But that's okay, because then what we're going to do is we're going to say that the direction, which is... let me just see here. We have my title, my reading, my wind direction there. I don't normally like nesting unnecessarily, but in this case, I actually think it makes sense to just do a section title, comma, reading, and I'm going to say grid template, grid column of 2/3. So if you're not too sure with that, what I'm doing before I hit save and we see it update, let's come and take a look. Let's turn this off. So let's look at the grid I created here actually. So that's my wind direction one here. This one, wind. There we go. So we can see, let's change the color of that so we can see it a little bit easier. We'll go with yellow. I want a bright yellow, come on. There we go. So I've created 2 columns, but because there's 3 items, it automatically created a row here. Now what I want to do is I want to say both of these have to start at 2 and go to 3. So if I do that, they push over, grid column, it's not reader, it's reading. And there we go, it's pushed those over. But the one problem with when this happens is by default, it leaves things empty because, it's looking at the order. It's going, this is first, this is second, this still has to be third. I moved these over to here. This is still following it, so it's going to go after, and it's just going to leave these cells empty. But in this case, I want to pull that up. Now, why didn't I just put this first in my markup? Because to me, that doesn't make any sense. You'll always want to make sure the order here, or the order, if your CSS were turned off, still makes sense. I want to start with these 2 and then bring in the direction after. If it started with the direction, we need to start with our title. You don't want to have wind direction 40. The wind direction is 45 and this section title is wind. It doesn't make sense. So we're going to start with the title still. But what we can do here is there's 2 ways to fix it. So the first way we could do that is actually here. We could do a grid auto flow of dents. And what that means is we can't leave anything empty. So it's actually going to pull this up into here. The only problem with that is by default, everything takes up 1 cell. So we have this taking up 1 cell, that's 1 cell, that's 1 cell, and it leaves this floating all the way down here in the bottom, which I don't want. I want that to stay up here with my wind that we have here. To do that, this has to go over both rows. I can't do that without coming down onto my direction and saying it has to be on both rows. So if I have to do that anyway, I find this is kind of useless. I'm writing that for nothing. But I'm showing it to you because that grid autoflow dents can be super useful in other situations, or you could definitely leave it on here. So what I'm going to do is do my grid row of 1/span 2 and hit save, and that should pull it up. And now what it's doing is you can see it's spanning across 2 columns instead of taking up all the room, taking up its whole thing and stretching that whole one out. Now, you might have gone, Kevin, why didn't you do 1/-1? very good reason I didn't do that, and it's because I never declared how many rows of content I should have. So by default, all the rows here that are showing up are being automatically generated. So here, if I look at my columns where I said there should be 2 columns, we have 1 column there. So 1 column here and 1 column here, I have a 1, 2, 3 on my line numbers. But if we look up to down, I have a 1, 2, 3, but I don't have any negative numbers. My negative 1's actually the same line as my 1. If I came here and I said grid, not here, sorry. If I came up to here and I said that my grid template rows repeat to 1FR, so I say there has to be some rows. Now there's -1, there's a -2, -3. You can't use the negatives unless you've explicitly declared those. And if you're a little confused about that, I have a video. There should be a card popping up somewhere right now that goes directly into the implicit versus explicit grid, and hopefully will clear a little bit of that up for you. But for that, that's the reason here. I think it's more useful to do a span 2. And now one last thing that we can look at is there is this really big space that's happening. The reason that's happening is, you see how big this is? Like, we have all this empty space on the bottom. And what that's actually coming from is the parent here, because of this here. So it's a little bit like Flex. When you're using Flexbox, you might know that, if you have 5 items they're in a parent that's display flex, they stretch. They all match each other in height. Same thing in Grid. So this box is matching this box's height, which is matching this box's height. So it's leaving this empty space on the bottom. So last thing we can do here on my wind is do an align self of start. You don't need grid start. It's not like Flexbox where you need to do the start thing, and you can see that sucked it up. Now, it's not perfectly as close as I'd like it to get there if we turn those off. Ideally, that would be a little closer, but what's happening is my 2 columns here are equal size. My rows that are being created by default are equal size. So we have this first one here, which is going to be there. So I guess we could actually do a grid row, grid template rows. We can do a min content and then 1FR for the second one. And so you can see there, it's sucked that space in. So if I turn that off, the space is a little bigger. And now when I turn that back on, it's sucking that space away because it's making the first row. If we turn that back on, the first row is now exactly the height of the wind. And then the other one is whatever the empty space is. So I guess now I could have actually set up 1 over -1, but whatever, we'll leave it like that. And just like that, we are well on our way to getting this to be a pretty cool site. We still have a little bit more work to do, but we're getting there. I hope you liked that video. It was a lot of fun for me to make. I'm really enjoying this Mars weather app. It's really cool. This project, I really liked it. I hope you're liking it just as much as I had fun building it. In the next video, which will be out tomorrow, we're going to be looking at just doing that little toggle switch, because I think that's something that's worth looking at. It's something that a lot of people could use on their sites, different sorts of toggles and things like that. So it's going to be its own standalone video before, in the last video, we're going to get to that thing on the bottom that's going to come up and go down with the previous weather in it. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please leave a comment down below to let me know about it. If you have not yet subscribed and you're enjoying this series, please consider subscribing. If you haven't yet told other people about this channel, please let other people know. If you're enjoying this, other people probably will too. And yeah, a big thank you to my patrons for helping support everything I do here on my channel. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.